Welcome to another episode of Football Insiders. We're 3 weeks in here, Michael McCleary, and I'll tell you what, we keep learning a little bit more week after week, but we learned a lot about 11 AAA last week. Let's just start with Stevens. Their first win since 2019. Last week we talked a little bit about this game and said, I'm not sure what we're going to learn between a Stevens and Roosevelt game. Did we learn anything in that game?
Yeah. I mean, Kim Nelson talked about it yesterday where, that was just a really tough environment for them. I mean, they came off of that marathon game in the Dakota Bowl in first week, and then they had to travel to Rapid City to play that game.
Yeah, 1 day of practice. Decent practice.
Basically, because, you can't really, he said, you can't really practice the next day, and then you got to travel, and that's a really long trip. When you get to game day, he said he was feeling nervous about it, which does not seem like, a Kim Nelson thing to be. So, for him to say that, I mean, that says a lot. But, Stevens, they deserve credit. This is not something they do often. They won a game. They did not do it last year. You have to go back to 2019 to find the last time they did it. So, after holding Brandon Valley to 14 points, granted they didn't score in week one, but after holding Brandon Valley to 14 points in week one, I mean, this is a legit team. This is a team that can make some noise. I mean, Roosevelt probably isn't happy with the loss. That's probably a game that they should have won, but, Stevens can't be overlooked for what they did.
Exactly, and then you said it. They gave up 14 points to Brandon Valley early in their first win. They shut out Roosevelt in the first half. Then they started giving up some points and gave up a lot of passing yards, but they had pretty much had a lead throughout that game. So I was impressed with what Stevens was able to do, and it'll be a lot of fun to see how they carry that through. A couple more notes on last week's games in 11 AAA. Harrisburg and Brandon Valley, both the top two teams, and they looked the part on Saturday.
Absolutely. That was my first impression of Harrisburg, and Harrisburg looks unbelievable. Gavin Ross, their running back, was maybe the most impressive to me because
he has been good.
You came in, you knew Knuth, and everybody knows Knuth. Even the coaches said it yesterday at the Presidents Bowl media day. But Gavin Ross, I mean, he's really quick and he could run people over once he gets to the edge. So he's going to be a problem all season for them. And when you have Knuth in the passing game, I mean, that offense is going to be unbelievable.
And the offensive line sets everything up, but to your point with Gavin Ross, like the offensive line will give him his first 5 yards, and then he gets another 5 or 10 yards after that himself. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's a really tough runner. From what I've seen so far, he's one of the best running backs in South Dakota. He's really quick. Like for somebody his size, he's kind of smaller stature, but he's got a big build. Yeah. For someone his size, you don't expect him to be that fast, but he gets to the edge really quick. And when he's on the outside, if you only have one defender coming at him, he's probably going to be in the end zone. Like that's a really tough guy to stop. And when you're focusing so much on your pass rush and trying to get to Knuth, I mean, if Knuth can just take a shotgun snap and hand it right to Ross and let him do his thing, I mean, is Harrisburg's offense ever going to be stopped?
It's going to be really tough to stop that offense, that's for sure. And who gets the chance to do that this week? Lincoln, the other undefeated team in 11 AAA. And I'll tell you what, with a minute left in the game, I wasn't sure they were going to be undefeated. Pretty crazy ending to that game.
Yeah, I don't think head coach Jared Fredenberg thought they were going to be undefeated either. I mean, he joked yesterday where the strategy coming into this week is to keep it close until the final 3 seconds and then just throw it up. So, that's strategy that worked for them last week. Obviously, just an unbelievable play at the end of the game. A Hail Mary that didn't even reach the end zone just fortunately falls into the arms of a Lincoln receiver that, just has a few steps into the end zone. I mean, you saw just generally just Watertown players just collapse.
Because they had a heck of a game.
And that game was theirs until the ball ended up in, in Lincoln's arms. I mean, that's a really tough loss for them. But Lincoln's coming into this week, emotions are extremely high. And, against the Harrisburg team, I mean, he joked about it at the beginning, but, they really just kind of need to keep it close until the end. That's what they need to do. They need to strike late.
Coach Fredenberg also said, about that Hail Mary. First of all, he was not happy with the way they played down the stretch. They gave up the entire field, gave up a 2-point conversion to go down, didn't manage the clock well out of the kickoff. He said, I was not happy with the way things were unfolding until, we get bailed out with a Hail Mary. So they're going to need to continue that winning streak, but they're going to have to start upping their game a little bit if they want to compete with the big boys.
Yeah, and if you had no context coming into those final 2 minutes, like if you watch the final 2 minutes of that game, just a video clip of it, you would have thought this is a happy video about a Watertown win over a AAA team.
Yeah.
But that last play, I mean, they got the ball back with I think about 34 seconds left in the game, and their first couple plays they kind of just tossed it to the outside, just tried to get out of bounds. Didn't really, like you said, didn't really handle it really that well. I mean, they didn't take many shots. And then their last shot, their only shot really.
It worked.
It worked.
Yep.
So, very fortunate win for them. But, it's got to be a boost coming into this game, especially playing against the top team in the state. I mean, to come in 2-0, I mean, to leave this game 2-1 with a little bit of a moral victory, I mean, that still says something in a very, very close AAA race.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about this week's games in 11 AAA. There's 9 teams in the class. 8 of them are involved in the Presidents Bowl. We have 4 games in the Presidents Bowl this year. The first time it's gone to so many games. 2 on Friday, 2 on Saturday, and we're going to go in the order of these games and hear from some of these coaches. Let's start with Stevens at Jefferson. We didn't have a chance to talk to Michael Scott of Stevens, but we did hear from Jefferson coach Vince Benedetto as he talked about what he's looking forward to in facing Stevens.
Coach Scott has done a really good job with that program. They play hard, they play fast, and now they get a win last week, and now they're really believing. Defensively, they bring a lot of pressure at you. They kind of play the similar style of what Coach Whiting does, where they're going to bring heat and bring stunts, and that's going to be tough for us to handle. Hopefully we can handle that pass protection-wise and be able to run against it. And then offensively, their playmakers, their quarterback makes a lot out of nothing sometimes, and they got 2 really good receivers and a running back that went for almost 100 yards last week. So they're very improved, and that's a credit to his coaching staff and his players out there.
Yeah, they're a very improved team. Jefferson, maybe a little bit of a surprise team as well. How do you break this one down, Jefferson and Stevens?
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed with Jefferson last week again. Obviously, their week 1 win, that was just about as surprising as anything,
right.
Just because, no matter how good their players are, I mean, a new team, you didn't know how fast that was going to come together. But Jefferson seems extremely well coached. They seem really organized. I mean, to take Brandon Valley pretty much down to the wire, too. I mean,
they would not give up in that game. Every time
for sure.
Brandon would get a 2-score lead, they would pull within a couple points, and then they just didn't give up.
Yeah, they got playmakers, and their defense really, really looks solid. So, against a Stevens team that, probably has as much confidence as they've had in the past couple seasons, that's going to be a really good game. I really think these teams are kind of on the cusp a little bit. Jefferson might be a little bit closer as far as that top 5 goes and, potentially contending at some point in the future for a playoff spot. But, I think this is going to be a really close game. To meet in week 3, I think both these teams are developing and, it's going to produce a good matchup.
I think it's pretty much dead even. I really like what Stevens brings. Defensively, I think that's the biggest surprise, is how good Stevens can be on the defensive side. They gave up some big plays to Roosevelt in the second half, which they changed the defense a little bit. They were just keeping the plays in front of them, and a couple of them got away from him. But they've got great linebackers, great speed at linebackers. Their secondary, a big defensive line. And Benedetto mentioned the playmakers that Stevens has, and that's what I was really impressed with, was Alex Troikmonen had 184 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's a big playmaker, and their junior quarterback, Jed Jensen, I've been really impressed with him too. I think he's not going to take a back seat to anybody. Taylon Ashley, of course, a great quarterback on the other side. I think we've got 2 good young junior quarterbacks going at it in this one. I'm really looking forward to the first game of the day.
Yeah, for sure. And, the one reason I would probably pick Jefferson in this game is that, obviously Roosevelt didn't come in with their best preparation, to go down 22-0, I mean, the game was pretty much lost in that first, kind of stretch of the game. And Jefferson really has shown that they're going to come out and they're probably going to be a little bit more prepared on the defensive side than Roosevelt was coming into that game. So, with the playmakers that Jefferson has on offense, I think if they keep this game close, they'll be the nudge ahead.
Common opponent is Brandon Valley. They both played them close. They were two different types of games. It'll be interesting now with Stevens on the road and, how Jefferson does now that they're back at home. So let's move on to game number 2. Harrisburg takes on Lincoln. This one starts at 8 p.m. By the way, these Friday games are on Midco Sports, so you can tune into Midco Sports Plus if you don't get us on cable, and check out those games. But Harrisburg at Lincoln, we heard from Coach Fredenberg and Coach White as they comment a little bit on what they're up against in the other team.
It is, and it's going to be a big challenge for everybody. They average, like a college offensive line. I mean, they're like 280, 290 across the board. They have a Division I, quarterback that's, going to the Big Ten, and that's kind of something special around these parts. We haven't had that. They have 2 wideouts that are going to be playing on Saturday that are very fast and catch the ball. Their running back is going to be playing on Saturday. So, they have a lot of talent. All across the field, but like anybody else, you got to go play them, you got to compete, and you just never know how high school kids are going to respond, both positively and negatively, and we're just going to come compete.
Playing well right now. They're young, and once you get on a roll, it's hard to beat teams, and that's where they're at right now. And 2 big victories. Just to scrape out a victory at home is a big deal, especially when you're young. You could be 0-2, and that's a whole different story. But they found a way to win 2 football games, and we're going to struggle here if we don't come out ready, guns a-blazing.
Yeah. Coach White talking about how Lincoln is 2-0. I mean, both these teams are 2-0 going in. And it looks like Harrisburg is strongly favored in this, but could you make a case that Lincoln is going to make a game out of this?
You can, just based on their first 2 weeks, but I still think Harrisburg wins this handily, just because I think at this point, they haven't proven otherwise that they're the top team in the state, and there's really no comparison at this point. But Lincoln has played really well, and coming into this game, I sort of alluded to this earlier, like it could be a little bit of a moral win for them if they keep it close. So, if they play close at Harrisburg, something that no team has done yet, granted, O'Gorman's the only AAA team that's gotten a shot at them.
They at least both teams started strong against them, Pierre and O'Gorman, the last 2 weeks, but no one's been able to keep up with them.
Absolutely. So, if Lincoln plays them close, Lincoln can still get a bump probably in the AAA standings just by taking a loss to a team that has given a loss to probably they've given a loss to every team they play, and they're probably going to give a lot of losses to a lot of people. So
I did not vote Lincoln in the top 5. They did make the top 5 just based on record. I still don't think they're quite in that top 5 range. This game could go a long way as to showing that. Their quarterback Tate Schaefer has really been evolving as a quarterback. I think he's going to be a good one. He's just a sophomore. They've got some playmakers, some young guys, but Harrisburg, they've got some seniors. They got size, and they are loaded all across the field at all the different position groups. I think I agree with you. Harrisburg will put a little bit of a show on, I think, especially in the second half of this one. Let's move on to the Saturday game. We've got O'Gorman at Washington, the oldest rivalry that we have in this class with the 2 oldest schools in this class, in Sioux Falls at least. Coach Evans and Coach Poppinga commented on what they're up against.
They're athletic everywhere on both sides of the ball. They like to run the ball with their quarterback, and he can throw a really good ball. They're tough to defend, and Coach Poppinga and his staff has always done that. Find a way to be tough to defend, and they put the ball in space in their playmakers' hands. So we have to adjust to that. And defensively, they're always sound. They always mix up the coverage against us. And Coach Hermanson and Coach Poppinga, the other Coach Poppinga on the staff, they do a phenomenal job over there.
Defensively, we think they're really athletic, especially up front. They're going to cause problems. We haven't ran the ball really well, in the first 2 weeks, and that's always an issue for us with our size of our offensive line. But now you look, 2 college recruits that they have up front, as their defensive ends, and a nose guard that's, big in size and athletic. So up front, we know that's going to be an issue. Their linebackers are always fast and athletic. So, I mean, all of those things we're going to have to find ways to get out in space with our kids. I mean, that's when we're the most successful and go out and try to win a football game. But defensively, we think they're definitely a very talented squad and have held two really good teams. You know, you look at the first week of Jefferson won the game, but I mean, we're held under 21 points, and the second week, holding a shutout. So obviously their defense is really good.
So we got two 1-1 teams. This is kind of the next, right behind the elite teams that could take that next step to become, maybe a Final Four team. It'll be interesting to see who comes out on top on this one, Washington and O'Gorman.
Yeah, I like both of these teams.
Yeah.
I think O'Gorman, showed that they're a really good team in week one. I think with a lot of teams going up against Harrisburg is going to expose them a little bit. Mm-hmm. But, in terms of teams that are right on the cusp in AAA, O'Gorman's right there. And Washington didn't have a great first week, but then they went and scored more points than anybody in all of South Dakota the next week. So I was actually happy to see them break out because, quarterback Max Thompson, he had 16 to 17 passes completed. I mean, that's a confidence booster after
doesn't matter who you're playing. That's good.
Exactly, and that's he had a really rough week one. He's a good quarterback, so it was good to see them break out. And you saw Coach Poppinga talking about it. They got really strong players on the line in Abraham Myers and Kendis Ledbetter. That's going to be hard to contain if you're an offensive line, and I think they're just going to get better and better over the course of the season. So
I think these two defensive lines have the best pair of edge rushers in the state. You mentioned Abe Myers and Kendis Ledbetter, but I think Rush Landry and David Alpers for O'Gorman, that's the strength of their defense, and if they can get after the tackles of Washington and disrupt what they do a little bit, I think this O'Gorman defense has a shot to keep this game close. Washington, when they started running the ball well, I think that's really when it changed for them against Jefferson, and I think last week they continued that with Blessing Tanai and Elijah Tanai running the football. I think they really found some balance on offense, and I think when they have that balance, they're a tough team to beat. This game is definitely a toss-up for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned David Alpers and Rush Landry. It's pretty remarkable that you could turn your defensive ends on one side of the ball and then send them out as wide receivers on the other side. I mean, Bennett Dannenbring has looked really good as a quarterback.
I think he has too.
And he obviously can make plays with his feet, but he gets better and better each week as a passer. So once they maintain that connection, and Manny Struck has been really good running deep routes as well. They got a lot of playmakers on that offense, and they're going to be really good team come season's end.
Really looking forward to the first one at Howard Wood Field on Saturday. Let's move on to the cap of the Presidents Bowl. We've got Brandon Valley at Roosevelt, two teams that have historically played in the Final Four, the semifinals throughout the years, and a couple times in championship game settings. And Coach Nelson and the interim coach, Matt Christensen, had this to say.
We have to get the ball. We have to have the ball. If Brandon Valley keeps it away from us, then the pressure to score every time becomes greater and greater. But we did that already. We showed that we could do that if we had to. And so I feel confident that we can hang in there with them. If we can get a couple 3-and-outs early in the game, maybe get ahead, maybe stay. If there's nothing else, stay close, then I think we have a shot.
That's a great team that will really come after us. We haven't beaten them in quite a few years, and they've got just a gigantic offensive line and a couple really tough running backs, a quarterback that's way better than in the summer. Talk about a meteoric rise for a kid to toss the ball around like that with a lot of composure and know the playbook and know where the ball needs to get and how it needs to get there. Their defense is, going to line up right and fly around, and they love hitting too, and they always have good swarming mentality. So we just have to let competition bring out the best in us and take on the environment and just embrace it and love it, because it's going to be, a real huge crowd. We know that.
So we've got Roosevelt with an 0-2 start. I don't remember the last time they've started 0-2. But they had a close one with O'Gorman. Ended up being a closer one. They were within 2 points in the fourth quarter against Stevens. And their sophomore quarterback continues to take strides. Jackson Brower ended up throwing for over 400 yards in that game against Stevens. But they're 0-2. What do you make of this Roosevelt team?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that they're probably the best 0-2 team, one of the best 0-2 teams in the state at this point, and going up against a really, really tough Brandon Valley opponent, I mean, there's a potential that they might be one of the best 0-3 teams come next week.
I have to agree with you. If they are 0-3 next week, it's still a dangerous team.
Absolutely, and, Coach Nelson was talking about it a little bit. I mean, Jackson Brower is their sophomore starting quarterback, and they tried to run the ball a little bit early last week, but Stevens started stacking 7-8 players in the box, so they decided to go with the pass, and they did so 41 times, and he threw for over 400 yards. He said he broke a school record.
Yeah.
Which is pretty remarkable considering that every single time that you talk to Kim Nelson, he mentions how much he loves the pass.
And they've had Taryn Christian and Jet Thune and Taryn Devricks, all these prolific passers, and Jackson Brower comes in and sets the record for yards.
Yeah, so Roosevelt's going to be a good team. I really like Tyree Nave as a running back. He's looked really good in the first 2 weeks, and Jackson Brower just keeps on getting better. I mean, you can't really make much of a bigger leap than he did from week 1 to week 2.
Yeah.
But I expect him to be consistent as the season goes along. That's why he won the starting job in the first place. And Roosevelt's going to be a really good team, but Brandon Valley is just a really, really tough opponent to run into when you're going through early season struggles.
Yeah, this Brandon Valley team showed that they belong near the top with how they played against Jefferson. Got big plays from Noah Thompson. They got big plays from all 3 of their running backs, Spears Whitty and Jordan Johnson and Peyton Egan, all having big games for them last week. So I think the offensive line really sets the tone for both of these teams, but Brandon Valley's offensive line has done a really good job so far this year. This one will be a lot of fun, and that'll cap off the Presidents Bowl. I know we spent a lot of time talking about 11 AAA, but we've got the rest of the state to cover as well. And moving down to 11 AA, last week we talked about who should have been the number 1 team, T or Yankton. T puts on a dominant performance against Sturgis. Yankton came up a little short against Aberdeen Central. So this week, who should be the number 1 team? T, 2-0. Pierre, only loss was to Harrisburg. And maybe Aberdeen Central, who's off to a 2-0 start. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, this is actually a closer run this week than it was T Yankton last week for me. I mean, I pretty handily had T ahead at that point last week. I voted them as my number 1 team. But this week, I didn't really know.
Yeah.
I mean, Pierre obviously had a good week coming off of that week 1 loss to Harrisburg, which we've mentioned Harrisburg a few times.
Yep.
Really, really tough opponent for week 1, especially when you're not even in their same class. So Pierre's going to be good, and Pierre had a really good bounce-back game. But Aberdeen Central showed something. Quarterback Sam Rolfs, he had a really, really good game. He ended up throwing for 309 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and then rushed for 79 yards for an additional 2 touchdowns. And one of his rushing touchdowns was like a 50-plus yard run, but he should have been credited for like an 80-yard run because
he had to run backwards.
He ran back about 15 yards
Yeah.
before he got a lane to run. And then
I just have to add something while we're on this. I was watching the stream of that game or kind of buzzing through it. They had about 4 snaps over his head like that, and he turned so many negative plays into positives. I think Sam Rolfs is a freak good athlete.
Yeah, when you have a player like that, it's hard to bet against your team, especially playing the most important position on the field. So, Aberdeen Central, I really think that they have a chance to be number 1 at some point of this year. Pierre and T are sort of above them at this point. I have them ranked 1, 2, 3, T, Pierre, and then Aberdeen Central. But this is one of the closest 3-man races in the state right now. Aberdeen Central to be 2-0, T to be 2-0 after a promotion from their previous class. And then Pierre has always kind of dominated AA. So, they're going to be good, and they showed that they're going to be good last week. But yeah, it's really hard to pick. But at this point, I'd probably pick T just based on how this early season has gone.
All right, this week's game's coming up. Brookings at Watertown. Watertown, Hail Mary away from being 2-0, and Brookings' only loss coming to T in that opening week. That'll be an interesting one. Aberdeen Central at Mitchell. Mitchell just lost to Pierre. But Mitchell back at home. That'll be a Saturday game. T takes on Huron. That one's also a Saturday game. And then Sturgis travels to Pierre. So anything in that group of games that you want to point out?
Yeah, well, Watertown, I feel like they deserve a lot of credit for taking Lincoln down to the wire. I mean, they had that game won, as we discussed earlier, and at the last second, just a fortunate play just went Lincoln's way, and then they lost that game. You could kind of see in just the way that their players took it that was a tough one. That was a game that they thought they had because they had a really, really strong stretch at the end there. So Watertown is going to be right in the mix there. And also Sturgis. I mean, Sturgis made the number one this week. They, a loss to T bumped T to number one in AA, and they're going up against Pierre, which is right there with T, for that number one spot. So if Pierre comes out and dominates Sturgis, and maybe Huron takes T really close, maybe Pierre's right up there at number one. Maybe Sturgis can make 2 number ones in 2 straight weeks.
We said at the beginning of the year, 11 AA is one of the most fascinating classes. It's really living up to be that. We have to mention Yankton too, who was the number one team. Didn't lose by much to Aberdeen Central. I think they're going to be in the mix. They have a 3-game homestand starting this week with Spearfish. Then they get Jefferson, and then they get Pierre. So it's statement time for Yankton to see how they do over these next 3 weeks. That could be a lot of fun as well. Let's move down to 11A. Let's talk about the Sioux Falls Christian game. They were one of those teams lurking right around the top 5. You went and watched them. What do you think about Sioux Falls Christian after seeing them in person?
Yeah, well, I came into the game, expecting to see a lot of Isaiah Young. He had a really big first week, and they like to run the ball. And they're without their starting quarterback, Brooks Nelson, who dislocated his foot playing a basketball game in mid-July. But, I was surprised. I went down, and their backup quarterback, Tate Snyder, really dominated that game. He was unbelievable, both running the football. He's a converted wide receiver, which Nelson is as well. So they're both great athletes. But, Snyder seemed like the type of guy who, you kind of throw him those wide receiver screens and just let him do work. And that's what he did at the quarterback spot the other day. I mean, he looked impressive throwing the ball, but when he got out in the open field, it was hard to bring him down.
That was the key for Snyder. He did throw a couple picks. He didn't throw a ton downfield, but he was efficient enough to really command this game for Sioux Falls Christian. And to me, that put them in contender status. I think they're right up in 11A with those top 3 or 4 teams, and we'll see how this vaults them on going through the season. This week's games, no top 5 matchups, no ranked teams against other ranked teams, but we do have a couple of undefeated teams. We got the Madison Bulldogs heading down to Vermilion, and right now, number 1 is Canton, but they struggled a little bit with Tri-Valley. I think Madison has a chance to make a statement by taking care of business against Vermilion, and they really could be considered for that top spot depending on how they play. Their quarterback, Nate Rickey, I'll tell you what, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the state, and I think they're really deep at the receiver position. And then defensively, they've been really concentrating Trey Smith more on defense this year, where he's played a little bit of both offense and defense. This year on defense, he has been absolutely blowing people up. So I think Madison has a chance to make a statement here of maybe being the top team in 11A.
Yeah, Madison was my number 3 team this week, and they did not make the top 5. So it's really interesting. Actually, they did make the top 5.
They ended up at 2. But
yeah, Madison was my number 3 team. They're going to be really, really close to the top come season end, and they're had a really good start to the season, and a big win over Vermilion can bump them even further.
We'll have to see. Let's move to 11B, where it's pretty much been winner and everyone else. This week, winner gets St. Thomas More, a little thinner St. Thomas More team than we've seen in the past. This has been a really good rivalry over the years, but this year, it doesn't look like anybody's close to winner. They have absolutely blown away the competition. Another couple games to watch. We got McCook Central Montrose playing Elk Point Jefferson, 2 of the maybe upstart teams in this class. They play against each other. That'll be a good measuring stick to see where they're at. Jim River off to a 2-0 start, taking on Woolsey Westington Springs Sanborn Central, who their only loss came to Sioux Valley. And Jim River is a team that we didn't know much about because we've got 2 new 9-man teams co-oping in Scotland and Menno. And they've gotten off to a good start, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on that one. You said you had a chance to talk to Jim Rivers' AD, or Menno's AD.
Yeah, Menno Superintendent Tom Rice, spoke to me on the phone, and we talked actually prior to the season before we even knew that Jim River was going to be one of these teams in the mix here. Interesting note on them, they played their homecoming game on a Friday afternoon because there was a lot of mixing around in the state this year because of a shortage in the number of available referees to fill time slots in some of the small, less densely populated parts of the state. So look out for that story at argusleader.com this Sunday.
Definitely check that out. And I think, these first 2 or 3 weeks we get a lot of Saturday games with these bowl games, and that frees up some official crews. I think as the season goes on, if we continue with the shortage, we might have more and more games moved up to that 3 o'clock time span so a crew can work 2 games in the same night. So interesting development. We'll have to check that out. Let's move on to the 9-man classes, and the game I really want to put a focus on this week and I'm really excited for is Chester area at Howard. Last week, Howard made a statement against Canastota Freeman. Canastota Freeman already with 2 losses this year, but maybe 2 of the best 9-man teams in Platte Geddes and to Howard. But I'll tell you what, a lot of people were down on Howard this year because they lost so many starters, but they have a young group that's really come up and filled the holes. Jay Syfor has played more at tight end this year, and he's had a couple touchdowns last week against Canastota Freeman. This week they take on Chester, and Chester's been that team for me. And I know I've mentioned this in the past, but I'm going to keep mentioning it. They're that surprise team in 9-man who are going to go from a 500 team to a contender, and we've seen it so far this year. They're putting up points in bunches. Stratton Eppert has been absolutely dominating, throwing for over 200 yards, running for over 100 yards in the last couple of weeks. He's just that kind of weapon at quarterback, and he has really been on display. And his receivers, Ryan Benson has been unbelievable, and then their youngster, Jovi Wolf, one of the best in the business, one of the best young 9-man players we've seen in the state. And I think if Chester can play with Howard, they say something. If they win this game, we've got to be talking about them as a potential championship caliber team. So I think Chester is one to watch. Another one to check out, Wall at Phillip. These 2 teams are undefeated, and sometimes we forget about teams that are out West River, and Wall has done their job. They've answered every call, and they've gotten better and better with Lex Heathershaw over the last couple of years coaching. And I think this is going to be a tough one going on the road to Phillip, playing a team that has shown signs of becoming a contender. So I think this one will tell us a lot about those 2 teams. And then 9B, we just have to say, every single week, a different number 1. We started out the year with Del St. Mary at number 1. They lost. We started out the next week with a new number 1. They lost. And then last week, once again, Sully Buttes was crowned at number 1. They lost. But they lost to a good Lyman team, but they still lost. And this week, Gayville-Vollen is the number 1 team. They get Corsica Stickney. I think we finally might have a number 1 team that wins this week, Michael. I don't know. I mean, I've never seen anything like this with so much changeover. I guess we just don't know who the top team in 9B is.
Yeah, it's been a crazy couple weeks, but I think we've sort of learned what we can learn at this point, and now it's now it's up for that number 1 team to finally keep that spot. I
mean, at the beginning of the year, I talked to different coaches, and they were like, "I think Hardin County's probably the best team." They spent 1 week at number 1 before losing to Wall. I had people tell me that they thought Corsica Stickney was good, Alcester Hudson, and I think they're kind of going on tradition more than anything because those teams have really struggled coming out of the gate. I think Avon's been one team to really keep our eye on, that they could be the next top team. They've finally got some senior talent. They've had a pretty young team over the last few years, so I think that maybe they will bounce back and make something happen, but we'll keep an eye on 9B for you. Another segment we added to the Rolodex this week is the old, I guess we're going to call it the Q&A, question and answer. But if you want to send us a question, we do tape this earlier in the day, so you have to let us know on Wednesday or Tuesday or a couple days before. But let us know something that you want to know that maybe Michael or I could shed some light on. We talk to a lot of coaches and keep up with what's going on throughout the state. So please let us know. We got quite a few questions today, but we're going to focus on one we got from Cole Hinckley. Why is Sioux Valley above Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan? And I assume they mean in the rankings. So we look at 11B. Right now, Sioux Valley comes in at number 2, Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, number 3. How'd you vote, first of all, and then explain yourself?
Well, I actually had Sioux Valley at number 2 and Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan.
Which
at
most
4.
people did. Oh, you had them at 4. Okay.
Yeah. So, I'm actually even, I guess, causing it even more outrage.
More
than,
anti-Seahawk than we thought.
But, after that first week game, it really could have gone either way. I mean, Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan just edged them out. It was a 2016 game, 1 score. That's not really going to separate teams that much, especially when you play them that close. But
And
since
Sioux Valley
then,
was on the road.
Yeah, and since then, Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan picked up a 44-0 loss to Winter.
That's what really hurt them. That's when they flipped positions.
Winter is obviously, we've mentioned them like they're head and shoulders above people.
After
within.
that win, we really started believing that.
Yeah, and so it's not surprising that they're going out and pretty much any opponent they go against, they're destroying. But for Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan to be the number 2 team, I think I had them at 2 and 3. Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, Sioux Valley after that first week game. For them to be the number 2 team and then lose 44-0 to the number 1 team, that really shook up the balance a little bit after that second week.
I have to add, on that exact same week, Sioux Valley plays Woonsocket, Wessington Springs, San Juan Central, a top 5 team, and kind of takes care of business. So even though you can't always go head-to-head and just leave it at that, especially after a first week game.
Yeah, and I don't think either of us are saying that we're right, but at the same time,
I can see why you have a question, Cole.
Exactly. Yeah. So
sense.
it's that's something that we read the question and we were like, that's interesting. Like maybe that is worth discussing. But yeah, I mean it's clear after that first week game. First weeks bring a whole bunch of things.
Right.
I mean, there were a bunch of people who were going down with cramps after that first week,
right.
which took some big players out of the game. We mentioned Kalen Garrett in DeSmet.
Yeah.
He didn't play that whole second half. So it's there's a lot of stuff that happens in week 1, and that 2016 game, potentially Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan doesn't win that game, now, or potentially they win it by more.
Exactly.
Now. So it's really hard to say.
But you just kind of have to you kind of have to go by how they're playing right now, and that's how I vote. Is if they played again this week, who would be favored? And I think Sioux Valley would be. Parker Pitts that first week wasn't able to throw the ball that much against the Seahawks. The last 2 weeks he has unleashed, and I think he's more comfortable back there at quarterback. And I think they become a stronger team as he becomes a stronger passer. And last week they went for a school record, I think over 500 yards of offense for Sioux Valley. I think this offense is finally clicking with Parker Pitts able to throw for over 200 every time he goes out.
Now, the interesting thing to note is, if Bridgewater Emory is indeed better than Sioux Valley, we might as well just hand winner the state championship at this point,
We're
right?
just talking about the semifinals.
So I guess in making these rankings, we're being a little optimistic that it's still open at week 3 in the season.
Just a heads up, if that's how it lands out and they're 2-3 maybe coming into the playoffs, that'll be an interesting game. To see who gets the 2 seed and who gets the 3 seed. But don't count out Roncalli. The winner of that Elk Point Jefferson MCM game is going to be right in the mix. Jim River maybe. We don't know how good they are yet. So 11B should be a lot of fun. But right now you're right. I think it's winner and everybody else until proven otherwise. Any final thoughts before we wrap this episode up?
No. I mean, we could talk about games this weekend.
Yeah. What are you going to be covering?
So I'll be at.
Presidents Bowl, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so I'll be at the first 3 games of the Presidents Bowl. We talked about them earlier in the show. It's at 4 p.m. on Friday.
4 and 8.
4 and 8 p.m. So Stevens at Jefferson, then Harrisburg at Lincoln on the Fridays games. And then I'm going to be at O'Gorman, Washington, and then we have a stringer covering Brandon Valley at Roosevelt. So Argus Leader will be at all 4 of those Presidents Bowl games. We got a big weekend ahead. I'm really excited for it. Friday's going to be a big football game. Big football day for me. So
yeah, it is a lot of fun, and they are spread out. So Midco Sports, as we said, has coverage of that 4 o'clock game and the 8 o'clock game. Saturday we get into Division I football, so we weren't able to do the Presidents Bowl games there, but I'll be out there getting some highlights for future use. But as always, tune in at 10:30 for Varsity Sports Live, where we kind of recap the night in North and South Dakota high school football too. That's always a lot of fun. Well, Michael, I think we did it. For Michael McCleary, I'm Jason Andera. Thanks for watching.